Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today on planning your retrofit interventions. My name is Dunya and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. We are joined today by my colleague Emma Woods, also from Turner & Townsend. This is a retrofit information support and expertise, or RISE event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner & Townsend. I will now hand over to Emma to start our presentation for today.
Thanks, Dunya. Yep, so my name's Emma Woods. I'm a principal consultant and I work on the RISE programme as a support manager and the Southwest Regional Lead. Today's masterclass will be talking all about planning your retrofit interventions. As Dunya mentioned, we have a small group, so it would be quite nice to kind of hear how you're progressing with some of your retrofit projects. If you've got any questions during the presentation, I'm happy to take them there and then. That way we can lead it into more of a discussion rather than a kind of formal masterclass. So please do kind of chip in if you want to. So the aim is to really better understand how you can start planning what your retrofit program is going to look like. So we'll cover the following items. We'll start by talking about why it's important to plan your retrofit, key steps to start doing this. As with every project, it starts with stock analysis, deciding what your target outcomes are going to be, identifying what properties to put forward for a program, understanding the preliminary design and other risk assessments needed to be able to plan your program better. So let's start off by talking about why we need to plan for retrofit. What we know is that in all our kind of housing portfolios, all our properties are unique. There is not one size that fits all. Your housing stock probably has lots of different archetypes with different types of residents and then different needs, therefore different costs, different designs, and we all have to kind of take account for that. We also have different properties that might be suitable for different measures. So if you've got properties in areas of outstanding natural beauty or conservation areas, the design measure might not be suitable for those certain types of properties. Or again, you might have a resident that might not be able to have certain measures fitted. So it's really good that we really understand what measures are going to be suitable for a property to better plan for your retrofit program. Then lastly is thinking about efficiency in terms of delivery. So it's really important to assess if you are going to have complex kind of projects to work on and actually understanding what those risk assessments are going to account for. So for example, if you know you're going to have some complex to decarbonise properties in conservation areas, how can you plan ahead to put some of those planning permissions in place or understand the kind of specific design requirements for those specific properties? And that way it will allow for a more effective delivery and help avoid any issues or delays within delivering your programs. So as we know, it all starts with understanding our housing stock. So having good quality data, if you've got good quality data to start with, it will help you better plan for the delivery and a smooth delivery of your program. So the 5 kind of key steps that we're going to talk about is stock analysis, deciding the target outcomes, identifying target properties, thinking about your preliminary designs for those properties, and risk assessment. So starting with stock analysis. When we're talking about stock analysis, we're talking about collecting accurate data about your portfolio. And the data can include things like, what is the construction type? Is it a cavity wall property? Is it a solid wall property? Are there kind of roof elements that you might need to consider within the design of the property? Understanding the construction type will give you a really good background of, firstly, what kind of contractors you might need to install certain design measures. So if you need specialist EWI kind of installers, if you need cavity wall installers, etc. So understanding the construction type will help you understand what kind of delivery you're going to need and what measures need to be installed. The other thing that's really good to consider is location. Again, if you're looking to identify a retrofit program, ideally you want to find a retrofit program where you're delivering a number of houses in the same location. Again, to help allow for effective delivery, but also to help with contractors. So if you're a housing provider that has stock across the nation, you might want to look at clusters of properties where there are programs of work. So if you've got programs of EWI happening in a certain area, or if you've got blocks of flats in certain locations, so you know where scaffolding will need to be kind of installed, understanding the location will help allow for kind of understanding what contractors you might need, but also what kind of measures and programs there are and how you're going to deliver it. Understanding what condition they're in. So this is really important to kind of tie in with some of your existing capital works programs. If you know what condition those properties are in, and if they're going to require kind of window and door replacements coming up, then this could be a really good opportunity to align some of those existing capital work programs where they might need where they might also need retrofit work. So having a think about talking to your asset teams, asking about the asset management strategies. Are there fire safety programs that are being undertaken where you have to take cladding off? If so, could that be aligned with some of the retrofit work that you're doing? Are there decent home programs that you're looking to address? If so, again, can some of those retrofit works align with some of those decent home programs to help improve the condition of the properties and kind of kill two birds with one stone in this situation? Thinking about what current levels of energy efficiency are to help meet different kind of policy requirements and targets. So especially with SHDF Wave 3 coming up, we know that performance outcomes are to achieve an EPC Band C. So knowing what properties are below EPC Band C and trying to find, again, clusters of properties that can support the delivery of SHDF or other retrofit programs. When we're thinking about energy efficiency, I would say, though, don't just try to think about energy efficiency in terms of EPC. There is other kind of metrics to kind of measure the energy performance of the homes. So things like estimated fuel bills. It'd be really good to be able to target properties which have high fuel bills. Or again, looking at things like heating demand. So where the fabrics of the properties are not performing, they will tend to have a higher heating demand. So can you look at the different energy efficiency levels in different metrics as well? The other part to stock analysis is understanding who your residents are. So if you have a really good understanding of who your residents are and what potential issues that they might be having within those properties, but also getting buy-in early so that you're less likely to have any refusal rates through the delivery, that's a really good position to be in. So knowing who your residents are so you can have a good targeting strategy and resident engagement strategy to get them onboarded quicker will help allow for a more effective delivery. And have any works recently been done to the property? So going back to looking at kind of your existing capital works programs. So if recent work has been done to the property, making sure that data has been updated to get a more accurate reading of the energy efficiency. So for example, if you know a new boiler has recently been installed, is that being translated in the energy efficiency of that home in the kind of new EPC value? And then lastly is, what is the heating system? So if you know the different heating systems that are installed within a property and being able to target homes which might require different heating systems because they're old and inefficient. So for example, you might have some oil or oil boilers that might need replacing, or even solid fuel systems that might need replacing. They could be a good one to start targeting, and especially in SHDF Wave 3, with the recent guidance being announced on Monday, you get an additional incentive for putting forward low carbon heating measures into your program. So if you are looking at trying to include some of those low carbon heating measures, it's about identifying which of those homes have inefficient heating systems at the moment that would be worth including into your SHDF bid. When we think about this, though, it's also good to think about how, again, that aligns with your existing programs. So if you've got a boiler or heating replacement program, making sure that you've understood kind of the data behind that as well. So all of this data kind of collected and collated will really help give us a better idea and a baseline of what properties you can start to include within your program. So you start with a big pool and then you slowly start to narrow it down and cut it out to refine different funding requirements such as SHDF. There are different platforms as well that help calculate your home energy your housing stock performance. So this is an example taken from Parity Projects, which gives you a baseline of what the overall kind of average SAP score is across the board. You can also see, let me just point here, it's got a breakdown of how many properties sit within the different EPC ratings, where there are kind of spikes in terms of carbon emissions, and yeah, again, those are the kind of EPC bands. Then you've got additional data such as the dwelling type, so whether it's a bungalow, flat, can't see what that says, too small, house, there we go, masonettes. So you have different software systems that can help organize this data, just to be able to help you manipulate the data in lots of different ways and be able to then plan programs better. So Parity Portfolio is an example of a single software system, but there are loads out there in the market, and you might already have your own that you utilize to be able to help identify portfolios of properties. This is actually quite a useful one to look at. So this is a geospatial kind of reporting element of Parity, which shows roughly which homes have different kind of EPC ratings. I think it's there. It's quite small to see, but you can also look at this in terms of what particular portfolios of properties in terms of archetypes as well are kind of geospatially positioned. So it's worth having a look at how you can map the data to help you better visualize it and see if you can identify clusters. One of the things I personally like to do with clients is actually identifying archetypes and then having a look at, okay, there's a program of CWI happening in this particular area. This could be a single program of work. And then again, start looking at the different postcodes of which you can start programming up the works. So in terms of deciding your target outcomes, this is really important to be able to have something to kind of work towards. We know with SHDF Wave 3 at the moment, one of the performance outcomes is to get to EPC Band C by 2028, because it's a 3-year delivery program. However, you might have your own internal targets, and it's worth considering that within some of the different funding targets. So you might have a net zero target or an EPC Band C target within your organization, and it's worth considering how that aligns with some of the existing funding programs that you might have. So once you've had your stock analysis and take into account which properties need to meet those different target outcomes, it's then aligning it with your wider organizational outcomes. So for example, I know I've got all these properties below EPC Band C, but eventually I'm going to want to get them to a net zero target. So let's map what it's going to take to get them to net zero, and at what point does it get them, at what measures will get them to an EPC Band C to then allow me to platform to get to a net zero target. You might also want to consider in getting it clean heat ready. So what measures do you need to install onto the property to be able to get it clean heat ready for future kind of phases of work that you might look to install. So moving on to actually identifying your target properties. So now that you have your stock data, you have the target outcomes, it's then about identifying which properties are going to be suited to that specific funding requirement or the targets that you're looking to set, and start clustering them and programming them into a group of works. So firstly, we've got the SHDF, which is below EPC Band C. So we need properties that are below EPC Band C. You then might also want to look at the cost caps. So you might have a specific budget in place for the next 3 years between 2025 to 2028. So what is that budget? And then of that budget, how many homes can you put forward of that pool of properties below EPC Band C to kind of fit the requirements of SHDF? So it's having to kind of do a bit of narrowing down of the initial property list that you put forward, and then having a look at what the cost of single retrofit is for that single archetype, and then how many of them can you do within those 3 years. So now looking at the preliminary design then, so once you've identified your target outcomes, have a shortlisted kind of version of or long list version actually to start with, of properties that would be suitable for the project. Then it's about considering what approach you're going to take to retrofit these to meet those required targets. So firstly, compiling the existing data that you have, including what kind of stock would be suitable for them, what measures would be suitable for them to get them to the set target, getting the right team in place, so talking to your asset team, thinking about who's going to be delivering this, who's going to be the project officer for this particular project, what resident liaison officers will you need to be able to deliver the project, who are your contractors to be able to deliver the program of works that you set in place. And then lastly, thinking about the ease of access. So going back to kind of resident engagement, how easy will it be for you to be able to get buy-in from the residents for you to carry out the works? So really thinking about that resident engagement strategy early on so that you avoid any refusals through delivery. And I was speaking to a social landlord this morning, and one of the ways that they did is actually warming their residents up to the idea of retrofit and their sustainability plans, even though they might not have been selected yet for this particular program. If you start warming them up now, then that you can it feels a little bit easier when they get asked if they want to take part in this program. So thinking about resident engagement early on will really help with that preliminary design. So the other part to think is that budget, as I mentioned before. So you might have financial plans in place where you have a set budget for between 2025 and 2028. So working out what that budget is, and then based on that budget, how many homes can you put forward, given the kind of analysis that you've done to see how much it's going to cost for those target properties to get them to an EPC Band C, for example. Check that it meets your objectives, intended outcomes. So does it help you achieve that EPC Band C? Are some not going to be able to achieve it for some reason? Are there other intended outcomes that it helps achieve, such as reducing the fuel bills, especially if you're replacing heating systems? How can this improve the fuel bills for the tenants as well? Establish whether software is needed to comply with the requirements. So for example, you might already have kind of existing home energy analytics softwares, but one of the requirements under SHDF is to also make sure it's past 2035 compliant. So where you're having to log past 2035 information or Trustmark or MCS information, it's also really important to make sure that that information is being collected and stored in the right place. And then lastly, think about potential contractors and ongoing maintenance needs as well. So yes, it's great to start thinking about which contractors are going to deliver this, but are there going to be any other ongoing maintenance needs that you might need to consider, especially if you're looking to install things like air source heat pump, for example? Again, you'll need to think about the maintenance of these going forwards for your assets team. So it's really important to engage with everyone within your delivery team, not just your bid team, but the people that are going to be delivering at the end, but the ongoing maintenance for it as well, especially if you're thinking about any kind of digital innovation as well, such as installing kind of data loggers or things within the homes to measure the improvement and the performance of the homes, thinking about how that fits with your business as usual approach and how that fits into your operations going forward. So lastly then is risk assessment. So when you're looking at the risk assessments, firstly, it's thinking about who your assessors are going to be, what kind of assessments are going to need to take place, what if the measures we've put forward are going to be wrong, are the fuel cost savings that we're putting forward accurate and reliable? So having an assessment of what your preliminary design has told you and thinking about what could possibly go wrong within this and how can we start to mitigate this. So with those assessment risks here, the mitigations will be triaging those assessments, thinking about what training and certifications are needed to be, that's actually this one. So in the wrong order, but the training and certifications needed for those specific assessors, making sure you're triaging your different assessments. So you're not just relying on desktop data, but actually collecting some retrofit assessments early on before you start delivering. I would recommend when you're putting forward your applications for SHDF, validating some of that desktop data with some real live retrofit assessments or detailed assessments, so you can be confident that when you go to visit the properties and start delivering, that they are the measures that you put forward for them are going to be reliable. And then lastly, the occupancy assessment. So again, just making sure that you're collecting that accurate information of what the fuel savings are going to be by actually understanding how the residents might use the property as well. So carrying out those assessments early on are great. So moving on to the design risks. So one of the things you might want to start to think about early on is, what is your retrofit strategy? So how are you actually going to deliver to your intended outcome? Not just potentially to EPC Band C. If you have a net zero target, what is the pathway or the building passport for that home to achieve net zero? And then, so if you have an idea of how it's going to achieve net zero, first you want to possibly take a fabric first approach, which is best practice, and getting the home ready for low carbon heat installation. Then thinking about poor integration of measures. So when you're designing it and making sure that you've accounted for kind of what specific measures are going to be suitable for that specific archetype and design. So if you've got a difficult to treat property, for example, there may be fixtures and fittings of a certain design that might be difficult. So for example, Cornish homes, the roof kind of verge fittings are quite difficult. So making sure that you're accounting for that and what specific services or specialists you might need to help with the installation of EWI where you've got those difficult roofs. Other design risks are things like overheating, so making sure that you're building in ventilation to your design as well, and also accounting for any overheating. So yes, it's great to insulate the property as much as possible, but with our kind of changing climate, we also need to make sure that it's fit for the future and you're not going to be causing any other risks such as overheating. And then poor communication. This can happen kind of through any of the design processes, and it's making sure that you're engaged with your designers but also your residents early on, and make sure there's effective communication between you as the residents and the designers and how the project's going to be delivered. So in terms of the installation, other risk assessments that can happen is poor integration. So again, thinking about the multitude of kind of stakeholders and people that are going to be involved in this delivery of the retrofit, you need to make sure you've got a multi-skilled team behind you. Again, I was talking to a social housing landlord the other week where they mentioned actually they don't have resident liaison officers. The resident liaison officer kind of responsibilities are part of the kind of project delivery team's ongoing delivery. So having a think about what does your team look like and to make sure that it allows for effective delivery. So that model might not suit you, and you might need to consider having resident liaison officers, who your kind of PMO teams are, how your contractors and suppliers work, and how that interaction between the residents also work. Inappropriate substitution, so not having the right kind of change management control in place if any changes need to be made to the kind of design program or the delivery, and just making sure you've thought about what that change management control process would look like. Poor installer design, so making sure that you've got detailed designs of the services ahead of actually starting delivery. That can help with any kind of issues through the delivery process. And then poor commissioning, this just hopefully through kind of making sure that you've got an idea of what your route to procurement might look like, and making sure that you're commissioning things in an agreed way, and you've looked through the contract and agreed kind of a contract management approach will help you better commission the project. Then lastly is operational. So thinking about when you're installing these different properties, are there going to be any risks for condensation and damp and mold? Hopefully not as you go through the past 2035 process, but what risk could occur through the installation of some of these measures? So making sure that there's a good handover process as well in place with the residents, so they know how to use the property or how to effectively heat their home and use their home, making sure that they're ventilating it and not covering up any of the ventilations, and that way reducing any risks of damp and mold occurring. Again, the controls not being used correctly, especially with changing your heating systems or looking at different heating systems, it's really good to make sure that they understand how to use those effectively. So for example, with air source heat pumps, they have their set temperature that they optimal, like they work at an optimal way. So increasing the temperature of them will not help in terms of improving the heating of the home. So it's worth making sure that that handover allows the resident to understand that they should be heated to a certain temperature to allow for optimal kind of energy efficiency. Systems disabled or overwritten. So again, that's kind of part of the handover process. And then poor energy performance. So yeah, so think carrying out sample post retrofit testing. Again, if you're looking at digitalization or innovation, it'd be good to consider installing some of those data loggers now before you carry out any of the installations, just to monitor how the improvements have worked. And then also promoting appropriate behavior of how they use the property. And that is the end of the slide deck.